think if we could ask the respected speakers this evening to make their way to the stage, please. And if we could, as far as possible, try and settle down here and fill in the gaps, it would make it easier for the speakers to focus on the attendees. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin the program this evening by greeting you with the Islamic greeting, which is a universal greeting of peace, mercy, and blessings. Good evening to one and all, to our respected and esteemed interfaith community leaders, civic leaders, activists, political leaders, peace-loving people, and listeners on Radio Islam International and viewers on ITV. We welcome you this evening to the night of solidarity against Islamophobia and hate. All of us are aware of the very horrific and the very tragic incident that took place at a mosque in Christchurch just over a week ago. Across the world, we have seen condemnation from various quarters across all divides, racial divides, religious divides, ideological divides. All people who subscribe to the basic values of peace, justice, morality have come out and voiced their condemnation, and rightfully so. And as tragic as this event was, every crisis provides an opportunity. And in various parts of the world, especially in New Zealand, people have taken the opportunity to once again remind themselves and to remind the world that terrorism, as it is called these days, or terrorists as they are labeled these days, do not only come from a particular religious grouping or certain race groups or certain cultural groups or certain countries or certain parts of the world. It's a problem that we have to deal with across the globe. And also, when tragic events like this take place, there are broader questions and there are deeper questions that need to be taken into consideration in terms of what is the environment and the narrative that we create that allows for such terrorists to come into existence in the first place. What is that narrative and what is that environment that we have allowed to develop, the stereotyping, the profiling of certain people in certain religious groupings, and in this case, especially Muslims, that allow for such horrific happenings and for such tragic happenings to take place in the first instance. So these are some of the comments and some of the pronouncements that we have seen the world over, and it was felt that it is imperative that in South Africa as well, we congregate to apply our minds to these deeper questions and to also voice our thoughts on these issues that affect all of us, where people across the world from different religious backgrounds and cultural backgrounds are affected and afflicted and are at times even victims. The program is a lengthy one. We have approximately I think we have 9 speakers actually, and each one is going to be allocated a time limit of 5 minutes, and hopefully they're going to try and contain their thoughts within those 5 minutes. There is going to obviously be the Isha prayer calling or the Adhan that will take place. However, because the program started a bit late and we don't want to make the program too long, those of the Muslim faith, we will congregate in this hall after the program has terminated, and we will perform our salah and we will offer our prayers. First, we will be calling Boang Jones from the South African Human Rights Commission. He speaks on behalf of the South African Human Rights Commission as well as the South African Communist Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I greet all the religious leaders gathered here this evening on this important occasion to remember the lives of people who died under horrendous circumstances. South Africa, given its preeminent role in the world and given its highly acclaimed constitution, has for many years been the beacon of hope, of peace, as our constitution is premised on the human rights principles of equality, freedom, and dignity. Given our role internationally, regionally, we continue to play an active role in advocating for human rights principles. The South African Human Rights Commission continues to play an important role in plan to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerances. This provides the Commission with an opportunity to ensure its effective implementation and monitoring the impact of this national instrument to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerance. As we speak, today there was a gathering in Pretoria to look at this national action plan to gauge progress made to date. In an attempt to deal with a myriad of race-related incidents in the country, the Commission has made it known that it will continue to advance the goals of substantive equality and multicultural tolerance in South Africa. We view the incidents in New Zealand and other parts of the world as incidents that could potentially trigger right-wing elements in South Africa to carry similar attacks. Multiplicity of voices from fellow South Africans on the need to speak with one voice, to unite against the vices that bedevil the world. We would like to see a world, or hopefully a South Africa, free of racism, intolerance, and prejudice, where all people coexist in harmony with little or no regard of one's religious background, ethnicity, social origin, or race. We believe that there are many here gathered today and other South Africans who are not present here today who subscribe to an ideal of a prejudice-free, intolerance-free, racism-free South Africa. And those people far outweigh people who are a pocket in the world, who are still stuck in a world divided by race, ethnicity, and nationality. We are committed to working with the foundation, the Muslim community, and other religious organizations in the country to promote tolerance, dignity, social cohesion, and equality as we enter into the 25th year since the advent of our democracy. Let us tackle all challenges that confront us as South Africans as a collective. Let us contribute to the national task to radically accelerating the process towards achieving our foundational values of a non-sexist, non-racist, South Africa and therefore build national reconciliation and nation building. And by us being united as South Africans, will hopefully contribute towards unity in the world. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boang Jones, speaking there on behalf of the South African Human Rights Commission as well as the South African Communist Party. I think it's important that we realize the perpetrators, when it comes to hate, when it comes to Islamophobia, when it comes to racism or any form of intolerance and discrimination, are always in the minority. And it is up to us in the majority, the peace-loving people, to take control of the narrative and to play our part in trying to effect a change and to show solidarity with the victims and to show that we will not tolerate these kind of activities and atrocities. Next, we call upon the Deputy President of the Muslim Students Association, Aisha Hamdullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Honored speakers, honored guests, members of the National Executive of the MSA, I greet you with the universal greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This evening brings us together to address an extremely important topic of Islamophobia. Our brothers and sisters the world over are experiencing this more often every day. In the wake of the most recent terrorist attacks on our brothers and sisters in New Zealand, it is necessary to reflect on the scourge of terrorist attacks which we have been experiencing all around the world. Upon hearing that a Muslim brother had opened the door for a fellow brother, greeting him and welcoming him to Friday prayers, only to be met with a response to his body to meet his death, and then proceeding to massacre everyone else in this mosque, simply for being Muslim, has placed Muslims in the world over in a necessary state of sorrow, heartbreak, and trauma. As the MSA, we would firstly like to unequivocally pledge our solidarity to the victims of this attack and their loved ones. We extend a hand of solidarity to all those who have been affected by terrorism throughout the world, from Charleston in 2015 to Pittsburgh in 2018. The rise of right-wing, white supremacist terror attacks raises major concerns for us as South African Muslims, and more so as students, where a part of our duty is always to actively be reflecting on our surroundings. We are extremely lucky to enjoy an extensive amount of religious freedom in this country. Most of us, not all, are privileged to live a life free of Islamophobia in the manner which many Muslims cannot live with around the world. The fact that I, as a Muslim woman, can wear my hijab freely without being feared to be a terrorist is a privilege. The fact that we are able to host such an event this evening without the fear of being attacked, hated, or discriminated against simply for being here is a huge privilege. The fact that many of us can wake up to the call of adhan on a loudspeaker in a secular country is a privilege. However, this freedom comes with responsibility as well, and we ought to use this responsibility and this privilege to counter the scourge of discrimination in our country and around the world. In the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O mankind, we have created you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you." This injunction is not a facile platitude. It is an instruction that we must know one another free from discrimination, so that we recognize our differences and celebrate them in a constructive way. Unfortunately, many religious groupings do not always live true to this call. We find certain groupings attempting to maintain a hegemony of Islam in South Africa, which at times is fundamentally in opposition to our teachings of Islam. While we may not experience much Islamophobia, in the spirit of speaking of hate and discrimination, We must question whether we ourselves are inciting similar types of hate and discrimination on other groupings. We must acknowledge that we find discrimination on the basis of race, class, and gender creeping into our practices of our communities every day. And in speaking of Islamophobia, we also have to confront our own circumstances in order to avoid this kind of thinking from reaching our shores. These acts of terrorism around the world are not isolated, and while not physically connected to us, the perpetrators of these attacks are connected by an ideology, a certain way of thinking. And in order to counter that ideology, we have to stick true to the teachings of our faith and spread the true message of Islam. We too must interrogate our own privilege and the racism and discrimination that still exists in South African society. It is only through this that we will achieve true social cohesion and move our society forward as a united Muslim body. As youth more specifically, it is also our duty to interrogate what this means for us as the leaders of our generation. And if we as Muslims speak of unwanted Islamophobia, hate and discrimination towards us, then once again we have a dual duty to ensure that we too are free of hate and discrimination in our own contexts, homes and communities. We pray that the victims of the Christchurch attacks and all those affected by attacks fueled by racism and hate are granted the highest place in heaven and Jannah, inshallah. Shukran.
We thank Aisha Hamdullah, the Deputy President of the Muslim Students Association. Indeed, what we have here in South Africa in terms of religious freedom and peaceful coexistence is something that we can be proud of, but something that we need to be thankful for, and that we need to guard, improve, and enhance. And we should not be shy to showcase our example to the world so that others can learn from us, whilst we also continuously strive to learn from others. Our next speaker is Rabbi Sha'ar Shaked from the Beit Emmanuel Progressive Synagogue.
Shalom Aleichem, Haverim, Yekarim, Salam Alaikum, dear friends. We have gathered here this evening to acknowledge our common human existence. There is much to celebrate in our shared spiritual heritage, but today our assembly is focused on the bereavement. We mourn the life of those worshippers which were taken in a house of worship during the act of worship. Sadly, this is indeed such a time. There are those who wish to destroy the rich texture of our diversity. What we see as a blessing is a curse to them. In this way, we understand that last week's attack in Christchurch, New Zealand is connected to the mass shooting in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania last October. These events are connected not because those who committed them were in communication. They were not. These events are connected because they are motivated by the same ideology, born of fear and hatred and striving for separation and discrimination. So don't be mistaken, friends. These are the agents of the old order. They sense that the world has changed. They sense the solid alliance among us, the progressive thinkers. They sense the strength we have as we come together to defend democracy and peace and human rights. They sense these currents and they are afraid, and it is their fear which makes them dangerous. We must acknowledge these perceptions if we wish to face this reality and to act together in order to transform it. So we will continue to reach out to one another in our continuing mission to build a mature and open society, and again we shall repeat these basic truths: that all of us are the children of the Almighty, that all of us should be treated with dignity, and that all of us are entitled to share the abundance of the land. These truths are valid at any time and in any place. We cannot and we will not give them up we cannot and we will not stop acting in unity for their fulfillment. Now I'd like to move from what we should do to the deeper level of who we should be. As some of you may know, when I was still living in the Middle East, I was privileged to work with and learn from some Sufi sheikhs during my years of activism for peace and reconciliation. I was, and I'm still humbled to be a link in this interreligious dialogue whose history is as old as the faith itself. Thus, I'd like, with your permission, to share with you some insights taken from this context. In Judaism, there is an established practice of studying, drawing from the oral tradition mainly as an act of remembrance in times of suffering and misfortune. Thus, by our study, we show deep respect for those whose lives were taken in Christchurch, New Zealand, as well as honoring those who have called this distinguished assembly. We acknowledge the blessed memory of Ahmed Muhammad Katrada, Uncle Ketty, and all the master sages of the Jama'atul Ulama, Horn fi Africa Janub, who have passed away. All of them are now with the Eternal, from whom all life comes. So, the book of Proverbs 27:19 teaches us the following: as the water reflects the face, so one human heart reflects another. Kemaim hapanim lapanim, ken lev ha'adam la'adam. The commentator Gershonides Ralbag explained 13th century that the same way as someone observing the reflection in his face in the water understands the shape of his face, so one can also understand who he is from what he can see in his companion's heart. From that, in turn, he is able to see himself clearly. For it is self-evident that if all human beings are made in the divine image, then when you look into the soul of your fellow human being, surely you will be reminded of the divine source of your own soul. And almost contemporary to Gershonides, a little earlier, was Ibn Arabi, the influential Andalusian Muslim scholar, mystic, poet, philosopher. And Ibn Arabi used a number of metaphors to explain the relationship between the Almighty, the Word, and the human beings, all of them somehow associated with reflections. For instance, the light of the sun, the light of the candle, the light and the shadow, the rainbow, very relevant for here in South Africa, the rainbow. The sight deceives us. We see colors, but in the reality, those colors are only fractions of the pure, undifferentiated light. Nevertheless, the most important metaphor used by Ibn Arabi to explain the relationship between God, the Word, as human, is the mirror. Ibn Arabi didn't invent this symbol, but he developed it very much, clarify the nature of relationship between God and his creature. The divine attributes come into actuality in a polished mirror, the polished mirror. And it is the task of us human beings to polish the mirror of our souls in constant attempt, achieving proximately to the beloved one, reaching one of the stages of the fana, devotional unity. You see, the nature of our world is such that on one side there is the existence of the absolute, the wujud, and in Hebrew, the four-letter names, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, that was existed, that is exist, that will exist, all this in the four letters, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And on the other side is the creation in us, the limited creatures. We are like the surface of an unpolished mirror, a reflection or shadow of the real. However, this is the greatness of the eternal grace. The heart of humanity, the surface of the mirror may and should be polished. A person can, for a brief moment, reflect the name of the Almighty. God is the mirror of the world because his creatures can identify their own image in such a looking glass, in a perfect mirror. And then, in this perfect mirror, friends, he who praises and he who is praised merge so that the worshipper and the worship temporarily coincide. A person can, for a brief moment, be one with the beloved in a spiritual condition, ittihad in Arabic, and in Hebrew, ahdut. Indeed, those moments are rare in our spiritual practice, but they do occur, and our spiritual tradition are able to guide us there. However, the goal of this spiritual journey is not the joy and satisfaction one gets from ecstatic moments. The goal of this spiritual movement is for the practitioner to come back from the light in order to function here, in this world of absence and disguise, olam ha'he'alem ve'ha'hester. As a clear and polished mirror, we should reflect one another's soul, so that the divine light will be spread to the four corners of the earth. And even in the darkest spots, our fellow humans should feel this light and know that there is still hope, that there is still trust, that there is still love. Dear friend, may the one who gave us the capacity to feel compassion and solidarity endow us with the spirit to overcome obstacles, to melt hatred. Friends, do not be afraid, for indeed the Almighty is with us. Inna Allaha ma'ana. Indeed, the Almighty is with us. Shukran, Ahwan Habiban.
Thank you, Rabbi Sha'ar Shaked. I'm glad you quoted Ibn Arabi in a way that reflects that he was much more than just a mentor to Erdogan. As part of changing the narrative when it comes to Islamophobia and hate, we have to acknowledge those who have taken a courageous and a principled stance subsequent to the horrific attacks in Christchurch. And I think foremost here would be the Prime Minister of New Zealand and her entire leadership team. They have shown the world how to react to these kinds of attacks and atrocities and how to show solidarity with the victims who in this instance happen to be Muslims. And I think there's a lot that we can learn, and I'm sure some of the speakers will elaborate further on that. Our next speaker is Ismail Vadi. He wears many caps, but tonight he speaks on behalf of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Jazakallah Maulana. The twin attacks on the 15th of March 2019 by a self-confessed white supremacist, Brenton Tarrant, on the Al-Noor Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Center in Christchurch, New Zealand, in which 50 Muslims were killed and over 50 others were injured, has to be condemned and is condemned in the strongest terms by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. These were unprovoked attacks on over 100 unarmed worshippers and civilians. They are brutal acts of terrorism with international ramifications. They are the deadliest shootings in the history of modern-day New Zealand. In a 17-minute video recording of the attacks, Tarrant played the marching song of the British military, the British Grenadiers, a Serb nationalist song from the Bosnian War celebrating Radovan Karadzic, who was guilty of genocide against Bosnian Muslims, and the song Fire, in which the singer proclaims, "I am the god of hellfire." New Zealand's Prime Minister, as Maulana has said, Jacinda Ardern, described the attacks as an act of extreme and unprecedented violence and a well-planned terrorist attack. What do we learn from this frenzied attack by a racist white terrorist? In his manifesto, Tarrant, he presents in a matter-of-fact language the motive for the attack. And he says, this is the quotation, "To take revenge on the invaders for the hundreds of thousands of deaths caused by foreign invaders in European lands throughout history." He has drawn inspiration from Anders Breivik, the Norwegian far-right terrorist who on the 21st of July 2011 killed 8 people by detonating a van bomb and then went on to shoot 69 young people at a summer camp of the Workers' Youth League. Tarrant confirms that, and I quote again, "I have only had a brief contact with Knight just here, Breivik, receiving a blessing for my mission after contacting his Knight brothers. He then offers a warning. We are coming for Constantinople, and we will destroy every mosque and minaret in the city." Now, what should we remember from this horrific, dreadful, and painful incident? It is important that we do not see this as an isolated terror attack by a lone wolf. Can I repeat that? This should not be seen as an isolated terrorist attack by a lone wolf. If one reads Tarrant's manifesto, there is no doubt that he is an essential cog in the global rise of the white supremacist and white nationalist movements that are growing in the United States, in Europe, in Brazil, in New Zealand, and elsewhere in the world. White supremacy is the racist ideology that believes the white race is inherently superior over other races and should control other races. White nationalism is a version of white supremacy that believes in a country built by and for white people exclusively. This is what he's standing for and representing. The popularization of white supremacist ideology on social media platforms and online platforms has given rise to far-right political parties. It's very important. So you have an ideology, but you're now seeing the emergence of far-right political parties, which in recent years have made significant gains throughout the Western world. In Europe, for example, far-right populist parties have seen phenomenal growth in electoral support. The Freedom Party in Austria, the National Front in France, the Party of Freedom for Freedom in the Netherlands, the Five Star Movement in Italy, the Golden Dawn in Greece, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany have run far-right nationalist campaigns based on two fundamental ideas currently trending in many European countries: uplifting the poor working class in a crippling or declining globalized economy, and constricting immigration from the Middle East in particular. We also see the emergence of right-wing movements in the United Kingdom, and the alternative right, the alt-right movement in the US, that is indirectly supported by Donald Trump. In the developing world, we have seen the rise of leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil and the BJP leader Narendra Modi in India. Now, these far-right movements have been possible because of widespread feelings of insecurity among Westerners. Fears of erosion of Western culture, sparked by the Syrian refugee crisis, have led to a rise in xenophobia, which far-right movements have capitalized on. Today, we live in a world that in some ways represents the period just before the rise of Nazi Germany. Our world has become increasingly anti-black, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant. The simple truth is that racist, white supremacists, and far-right groups and parties globally, they are coordinating their activities more effectively now in the global stage. They're using new media technology, using elections and democratic processes to win seats in parliament. And the second truth is that they are being inspired and emboldened by leaders like Donald Trump. And so we've seen dead bodies of immigrant children wash up onto the shores of the Aegean, harrowing scenes of African refugees crowded onto inflatable boats en route to Europe, and thousands of foot trekking from South America to the US. We've seen progressive protesters against the Unite the Right rally targeted in Charlottesville, and Jewish worshippers killed in Pittsburgh. And only yesterday, we've just witnessed live on Facebook the massacre of Muslim worshippers in Christchurch. We should never believe that South Africans are immune from such dastardly acts. We should never believe. We appreciate, we are grateful for the religious tolerance, the cultural tolerance, the linguistic diversity we have in our country, the freedom of religion, but don't ever take it for granted. We are not safe from white supremacists and far-right organizations. We should not forget that we had the violent AWB and the Boerenmacht in this country. We witnessed the criminal actions of Baron Strydom of the Witwatersrand, who massacred 7 blacks on the 15th of November 1988 on Strydom Square in Soweto. And we must be aware that in the recent times, white supremacists who are not wanted in Europe, they're not allowed to live in their own countries, are living today in South Africa and providing paramilitary training to white South Africans against what they call white genocide. It's happening in our own country. This farmer killings, they are categorizing that as white genocide and are starting to train farming communities in different parts of the country against what they call the white genocide. And these supremacists who are now living, abusing our democratic freedoms, are linking South African far-right movements with the global white supremacist movement. What all this tells us is that the world that we have imagined for our children, one defined by peace, tolerance, progressive values, liberty, justice, and inclusion, may not exist if certain steps are not taken. The New Zealand attacks, while a blight on our humanity, in some ways has forced the world to consider with greater seriousness the threat that the rise of the white right-wing movement poses to democracy and global peace. It has forced the world to recognize that an individual who is a white, male, and inspired by a violent supremacist ideology can be called or is a terrorist. What should we do? So I think that's an important question. We need more than just solidarity meetings such as these. It's important that we have these solidarity events, but we have to begin to do something practically about it, specifically in our own country. Our anti-apartheid struggle veteran, the late Ahmed Kathrada, in a speech to the United Nations in 2014 said, and he's given us a lead, he asked the UN Assembly, what is the alternative vision to the global resurgence of racism today? And he answered by saying, take up the reins and actively move towards building a truly non-racial world free of discrimination, and look towards creating a worldwide network or forum to begin a global campaign to combat racism in all its forms. In this way, maybe the dream of a green peace, like the Greenpeace movement, the dream of a green peace against racism could become a reality. So several years have now passed since he spoke at the UN. He is no longer with us to lead us, and we have passed the crossroads. We must applaud and support the progressive, humane, and visionary leadership of a very young New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. I'm told she was a DJ before she became the Prime Minister. Many people don't believe it. But it's amazing that a young woman such as herself could have stepped onto the world stage with such grace, such compassion, such a broad humanity, and with such dignity, that she stood out as a symbol, a new symbol for what our world should really look like. She has shown that you don't need a massive army to bomb people. You don't have to be an imperial power to fight the scourge of white supremacy. You do so by promoting and advocating the best human values, taking action that protects people across all faiths and cultures, and being compassionate and caring to the other. Most of all, in today's time, it means standing up for the oppressed of the world. So, Mona, I'm not going to be long. Leadership of this kind has unexpectedly been exhibited by Ardern at a global level. But it should be an example to us here in our country and in our communities. What can we do at a local level to stamp out the scourge of racism? Because the truth, as we've heard from the MSA, that there is racism in all of our communities. In fact, it's on the rise in recent times. We've had these widely reported incidents, individual incidents of racism. But so few people in our own community, in spite of our great fight against apartheid and racism, so many people are not taking a stance today. We listen to it in our weddings, in funerals, social events. Now with the political instability, racist comments are almost becoming like normal for us nowadays. We just accept it. We don't even combat it. We don't challenge it anymore. It's wrong. If we don't act against these forms of racism within our own communities, in our own country, you simply leave the platform open for white supremacists to take the stage and to advocate their philosophy of life. So we do send message of solidarity to the people of Christchurch, to all the people of New Zealand. And we have to look inwardly, as the Rabbi has said. in bringing out the best in terms of our human values. For us in civil society, in the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, the attacks in Christchurch should prompt us to understand the critical need for increasing interconnectivity between those of us who are progressive. The progressive movement in this country has become fragmented and isolated. We need to rebuild the points of connection. And locally, we have to begin to connect with other progressive forces in our communities to tackle this scourge. And increasingly, we've had a delegation as the Kathrada Foundation from Reggio Emilia in Italy. They played a major role, that state played a major role in supporting the anti-apartheid movement. They were host to many ANC activities in Italy. They did the first publications of the ANC in the 70s. They came to us not very long ago and say, we now need South Africans to help us fight the white supremacist movement in Italy. We need your support. We need your international solidarity. So I think we take the lead from Ahmed Kathrada, that we need a global movement against white supremacist ideology. And in South Africa, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation is central in building the anti-racism network in South Africa. Last week we had the Anti-Racism Network Week. Again, so few people are participating, so few organizations are getting actively involved in this work. So our call is this, our rallying cry is really, we need a Greenpeace movement against racism globally and in our own country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MEC Vadi, speaking on behalf of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Indeed, the effort that is required to combat racism, to combat discrimination, Islamophobia, needs to be global and it needs to be coordinated. And part of that effort needs to be highlighting and calling out duplicity in the media, as well as in the actions of global leaders, where you see certain organizations initially calling the attacks a terror attack and then deleting the tweet and calling it a mass shooting. You know, refusing to use the same kind of terminologies that are used when people of another religious background are the perpetrators and others are the victims. Also leaders, you know, leaders congregate in France when there's a killing, when there is a shooting, and the same kind of worldwide condemnation from a certain grouping of leaders is not seen when the victims are of a particular religious affiliation or a particular race group. So that duplicity and that inconsistency also needs to be called out. Next, from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, we have Dawood Rapalalane. He'll be reading out a message from Pastor Russell Abrams from the South African Council of Churches, and he'll also be reading out a message from Nitz Palani from Via Christi.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I'll be reading a message from Pastor Russell Abrams. It says, Christchurch killings. The terrorist shootings that took place recently in Christchurch was the cruel, utterly inhuman act that ended the lives of dozens of innocent worshippers. Murder is always wrong, but committing murder in a place of worship is especially heinous. We stand in solidarity with the world in condemning this atrocious acts of violence. The best of our philosophies, human traditions, and religious teachings envision a just world where people are not merely tolerant of one another, but where they can actually love each other and live in peace in their neighbors. This act and so many like it keep us locked in a constant state of suspicion, bigotry, and hatred. Moreover, this kind of violence remains the breeding ground for further acts of intolerance, each becoming progressively worse than those that came before. It was deeply heartwarming to see Prime Minister Ardern and her people express shock and outrage at the killings, followed by an outpouring of sympathy and genuine love for the victims and their families. Their response and commitments to change the gun laws show what global citizenship could be. The young killer and every other violent individual, whether motivated by ideology or religion, represents the worst manifestation of twisted human nature. The best that the rest of us can do is to continue to express our anger at wrongdoing from whichever quarter it comes, and to work and pray for a world that is kinder and more just. I want to close with the words of the Bible that says, I may speak in the languages of humans and of angels, but if I don't have love, I am a loud gong or a clashing cymbal. I may have the gift to speak what God has revealed, and I may understand all mysteries and have all knowledge. I may even have enough faith to move mountains, but if I don't have love, I am nothing. I may even give away all that I have and give up my body to be burned, but if I don't have love, none of these things will help me. Love is patient, love is kind, love isn't jealous, it doesn't sing its own praises, it isn't arrogant, it isn't rude, it doesn't think about itself, it isn't irritable, it doesn't keep track of wrongs. It isn't happy when injustice is done, but it is happy with the truth. Love never stops being patient, never stops believing, never stops hoping, never gives up. Love never comes to an end. So these three things remain: faith, hope, love. But the best one of this is love. The next letter is from the Via Christ community from Nitspilani. The Via Christ Community Church, together with decent people around the world, condemn in the strongest ways the act of terror against Muslim worshippers in this hateful terror attack, targeting the Al-Nur Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Center Mosque in the New Zealand city of Christchurch on the 15th March 2019. This act is not directed only at Muslims, but it is an act of terrorism against all humanity and all values. Violent extremists of all stripes should know that there is no justification for committing such acts of violence against others. The Via Christi Community Churches expresses its heartfelt solidarity, our sympathy and condolences for all affected by this tragedy. We are praying for healing of the injured and the consolation of those who grieve the loss of their loved ones. Holy Spirit of God, as the people of Christchurch take time to bury their dead and breathe again, resting from the horrors of the past few days, we pray that this is the last time we mourn the murder at a secret address. We thank God for the people who have turned out in large numbers in solidarity against hate and Islamophobia. Lord, we remember your words in the Beatitude in Matthew 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Dawood. Someone seems to have misplaced a set of khakis. Seem like Honda khakis. You can just let me know if it's your keys. Our next speaker is Reverend Mzwandile Molo, speaking on behalf of the South African Council of Churches and the Methodist Church of Southern Africa.
Thank you very much to the MC, and greetings to the religious leaders who are here, and greetings to everybody who's present here today. As I greet you, I need to clarify one small little thing. Indeed, I am a Methodist, but I don't speak on behalf of the Methodist Church now. I don't want to be in trouble with my church, because my church can easily excommunicate me, and I do not want that to be the case. I speak here on behalf of the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, the Reverend Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, who unfortunately could not make this occasion due to pressing matters. So I tender his apology and then speak as he has instructed me to speak. So whatever it is that I say, please remember, it is not me speaking. It is him speaking through me. And if there's anything here that I say that might not work well, please don't look for my address, look for his address. I will tell you where he is. We greet you as the South African Council of Churches this evening in a deep sense of righteous anger, in a deep sense of deep sadness for what has happened in New Zealand. In its ugliness, is a reminder of what is possible when human beings are driven by hate, where love is extinct, where justice is not driving them, indeed where their cold-hearted interest of self-preservation in a world which they don't need to self-preserve guides them into acts of terror that have no description except of horror. In that ugliness, we stand with the people of New Zealand and indeed the people who went to worship God in the mosques of Christchurch. Your identity and the God you worship should never be an invitation towards death. For your worship of God is an expression that you have of the beauty of life and how in that beauty we are connected. So we stand as the SACC here to say there is no nuance. It is terror, unmitigated murder, deliberately done. So not only as to kill those that have been killed, but to intimidate others, such that their souls are bent towards the power and hegemony of hate. And we as SACC stand to say to the people of New Zealand, we also want to acknowledge the beauty in the midst of that ugliness. We acknowledge, again, as everybody has said, the leadership of the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ms. Ardern. She has always been an inspiration because she has been a Prime Minister who was pregnant. And she has always shown us that the human part in leadership is an essential part of who we are as leaders. But I want to elevate the ordinary people of New Zealand, mothers who took young boys and girls to the place of murder and terror and say to them, you might not believe in the same God as those who have killed believe in, but want you to see what hate can do. And they allowed their hearts to embrace the world as they embraced the victims. So we say as the SACC then, in the midst of that ugliness, let us not forget the beauty of love that transcends all these limitations. I stand here as a South African who doesn't speak in a vacuum. I stand here because I'm a product of a society that has struggled with hatred, that has engaged deep in its soul what it is to be the best as God has created all of us. If you were to indulge me, my sense of engagement this evening is located in my own knowledge that the best of who we are as a people is when we are able to reach out beyond those narrow identities that we know and find ways to hold on with one another and tell the world something beautiful can be evolved from our own diversity. And I come here and stand here before you, and I'm going to tell a little story that my aunt, I'm from a small place called Sultan. My aunt called Farid Esak, and some of you might know Farid Esak. My aunt calls Farid Esak as Umfundisi. She makes no difference between me, who wears the collar, and Farid Esak. And the reason why she calls Farid Esak Umfundisi is because in 1988, in a small town called Sultan, we gathered in our fight against apartheid in a small church, congregational church. And when we gathered in that church, we were expecting Busak, we were expecting Desmond Tutu to arrive. Typically during those times, when the police realized that Desmond is not coming, Ellen is not coming, they decided that we are easy fodder, and therefore they attacked the church. Inside the church was Farid Esak, a proud Muslim, committed to what Allah teaches. And he stood with us. As the tear gas fell upon all of us, he ran away, and my aunt was running behind him. And my aunt tells the story as the priest of that local congregation was closing doors for everybody because he was afraid of the police. It is Farid Esak who held her hand and ran with her into a place of safety. And that experience has marked my aunt's imagination of what it is. She does not care whether they are Christian or Muslim. All she knows that our common humanity calls upon us in the moments of darkness to reach out and hold one another, because it is only in those moments of darkness that we're holding together we are able to show the light to the world. And I come here then in that tradition, in a tradition that knows that, and I want to say to you, people of the Muslim faith who are here, and the people of New Zealand, indeed, the attack in this moment, in this time, is particular. It is particular because it attacks those who are Muslim. But I refuse to say I'm with you, because I'm not with you. I am you. I'm not a bystander watching. History has taught me that being a bystander only allows you to wait for your own moment of attack. Because when you stand by as a bystander, you encourage those who are empowered by hate to become the vessels that dominate our own storytelling, and that domination, and they impose themselves. And you, in fear of them, keeping silent, be careful, because they are coming for you next time. And therefore, I also am a product of knowing that my identity, as peaceful as it has been, can invite those who are white to come and attack me, not because I've done something wrong to them, but simply because I look differently to them. I threaten their prosperity, I threaten their greed, I threaten their own sense of security, and because I'm different, I have lived through being attacked simply by my identity. What they have done then in Christchurch, they have done to me as a black South African who has lived in this nation. And because of that, I can never be with you. I can only be you. Because in my own life story, I've seen what hate can do. And because I've seen what hate can do, I stand and say, you and I, my brother, are the same. And if we want to engage these powerful forces of evil hate, you and I need to realize that the distance between you and I is shorter than we think. And we need to find ways to be in solidarity in a deep way. We do this, my dear brothers and sisters, with the knowledge that the world is obsessed with the purity of identity that is an illusion. We live in a world that seeks to purify its own identity. And people are seeking to that thing that is essential to them, that makes them different to others. We live in a world where people seem to want to say, I am different to you, and this is how I'm different to you. And in the search of that purity, we live an illusion that disconnects us from our common identity and common humanity. Because we're obsessed with this purity, we then seek to destroy that which is not us, because we want to protect that which is purely us. And that finds itself in different expressions. In this particular context, it is white supremacy. But tribalism is part of that. When I, as a Xhosa-speaking human being, simply think that I am better because I'm Xhosa-speaking and the one who speaks Zulu is less than me, or Pedi or Tswana, I am in pursuit of the cancer that is going to be there to destroy me, and we are going to wake up one day and realize that the horrors of Rwanda can revisit us, because in our search for pure identity, we disconnect ourselves from others who we need to build a different society together. So when we stand here and we have to say white supremacy is evil, it destroys and kills. But we must ask the question, what are our own searches for purity? What are the things we search for that distinguishes us so much from the other that we forget the humanity of the other? And if we are not able to do that, the attacks of Christchurch will be repeated in our own midst. And sometimes we ourselves are going to be perpetrators of attacks, not by guns, but by words that destroy others. If we are going to have a different world, we also must speak truth to the fact that in our world we live in, racism is propelled, empowered, and emboldened from the head of the empire. We must realize that we are living in a dangerous world where the emperor is the source, if not the petrol that instigates these hatreds. So we need to speak to our American brothers and sisters and challenge them that what they have produced for the world is an emperor who is not a source of reconciliation, but a source of division. And they have a responsibility to help us deal with the emperor. The last thing I want to say, if we are going to have a different world, we have a responsibility to elevate our diversity. You and I cannot wait for moments of solidarity in order for us to contribute towards a transformed world. You and I have a responsibility to tell the world by our own actions that our diversity is a gift. And when we embrace our diversity, not because we're angry with white nationalists, not because we're angry with white supremacists, but because the beauty of life is found when you and I hold hands together and elevate the image of God. It is our own tradition in the African sense that the best of who I am comes from acknowledging the best of who you are, because indeed, umntu ngumntu ngabantu. God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend. Our next speaker, Pauline Naidu, the President of the Hindu Mahasabha, Gauteng.
Good evening to our program director, our dignitaries, and all our speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, firstly, to the organizing committees for actually getting the Hindu Mahasabha involved here and for getting us to speak to show our solidarity as well. Now, Islamophobia is a growing social problem that promotes an atmosphere of fear, hatred, or violence towards Muslim people and currently affects Muslims throughout the world. An ideological hatred and irrational fears grows so danger the Muslims grows so danger is caused to Muslim citizens. I have read many stories, seen many YouTube videos about assaulting and abusing Muslims, not just Muslims, but people of different culture, people of different religions, different color. Terrorism is caused merely by hate. It's the hate of something we do not understand. Most Muslims are worried about their safety everywhere they go, be it in the workplace, be it in the schools. Islamophobia is becoming a problem that should be addressed by all Muslims and non-Muslims. In the past decade, especially over the past 5 to 6 years, the rise of Islamophobia has affected the lives of many Muslims living in Western countries. Islamophobia is by nature a racist. It makes general assumptions of a large group of people who share a common belief system, which is their religion. Making a generalization to the followers of Islam or Islam itself will oversimplify what is a diverse and complex global religious tradition. It is necessary to remove the otherness of Muslims and for the West to promote education as a way to foster intercultural and interreligious understanding. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they do not know each other. They do not know each other because they have not communicated with each other. Even though he was referring to black segregation, that quote transposes equally and explains the difficulties Muslims and other religions and cultures and people encounter when interacting and integrating into primary Western societies that know so little of other people's cultures. As the Hindu Mahasabha, we do not support Islamophobia, racism, or terrorism of any nature. We do not support hate, and we do not support hate to any culture or any religion. We are not taught to hate. The scriptures, be it the Bible, be it our Bhagavad Gita, be it any scripture that we see in any religion, does not teach hate and violence. All we teach is love and understanding. We teach peace, we teach tolerance. If we cultivate love, not hate in our hearts, and this is what is going to make the world a better place for all of us to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. The next speaker is the Secretary General of the Council of Muslim Theologians, that's the Jamiatul Ulama South Africa, Maulana Ibrahim Bam.
I begin by praising the Almighty and sending salutations upon the messengers of the Almighty and all of those who follow them in righteousness and guidance. Program Director Maulana Suleiman Rawat, distinguished guest, leaders of the different faith groups, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here today, and I think before I go, I just heard Ismail Wadi saying that the Prime Minister of New Zealand was previously a DJ. So Maulana Suleiman Rawat, you still got a chance. Being the DJ of Radio Islam. Of course, we have gathered here today on the basis of a tragedy that had taken place, a terrorist attack in Christchurch. And of course, it is a tragedy the way many other similar type of atrocities is a tragedy which have taken place in different parts of the world. One of the most harrowing images was that of a small 3-year-old child being carried from a masjid and carried from the place of worship, where people normally come on a Friday for the sake of, and of course 5 times a day, for the sake of worshiping the Almighty, for the sake of devotion, for the sake of gaining proximity to the Almighty. In fact, during the course of my Friday talk, I was speaking that no one actually, even after what had happened, and of course during the last week, journalists from the Sunday Independent asked me and said, would there be added security in the mosque this coming Friday? And I can't think of any mosque in South Africa that had added security on any Friday or coming Fridays because of what had happened in Christchurch. Because normally people come to places of worship to gain security and to gain proximity to the Almighty. So therefore it has been something that, of course, we appreciate this coming together in solidarity with regard to showing our condemnation over what has happened. Of course, while we condemn that, we also have to admire the reaction of the people of New Zealand. And that has been something that, given from the very Prime Minister, the people of New Zealand coming together and showing their reaction and condemning the issue on the basis of a common humanity. And it's an important point that we need to, again, reiterate, despite our diversity, as the Reverend had made mention, that we have diversity. The Almighty says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. Amongst the signs of the Almighty is the creation of the heavens and earth, and creating people in different colors, different ethnicities, in different groupings. And Almighty has made mention of this in several places in the Holy Quran. So despite our religious diversity, we are together on the basis of common humanity. Says the Almighty in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. I have granted respect and dignity to every child of Adam. And according to this verse, every human being, by virtue of being human, is accorded dignity by the Almighty. And a scholar has very beautifully interpreted this verse. He said, today, many a times we show respect to people because of their positions. So we respect a person because he's a politician, he's a leader, he's a religious leader, he's a man of influence, he's a man of wealth. He said, we have not actually acted upon this verse of the Almighty. The Almighty did not say, respect titles. He said, respect human beings. And that is something that we have failed to do. And despite our diversity, we are common in our humanity. And it's something that we have to cherish and we have to respect and grant and give dignity to. We are also part of a broader society. And it is our religious duty as Muslims, we have been told, with regard to making our effort and striving towards the goodness and the prosperity and the peace and the harmony of the broader society. The Prophet Muhammad had said, مَا زَالَ جِبْرِيلُ يُوصِينِي بِالْجَارِ حَتَّى زَنَنْتُ أَنَّهُ سَيُوَرِّثُهُ. That the angel Gabriel and Jibreel, he emphasized upon me the rights of the neighbor. And in another saying, the Prophet had said, irrespective of the background of your neighbor, he's still your neighbor. And he has certain rights. And he said, he emphasized the rights of the neighbor to such an extent that I thought that he's going to make the neighbor part of a person's estate. Can you imagine what difficulty there would have been if that's happened? We have enough difficulties with regard to estates within families. Can you imagine if the neighbor was made part of the estate? But this shows how much emphasis was placed by the Prophet Muhammad upon this, that they felt that the neighbor is going to be made part of the estate. And we also know that the Prophet Muhammad is on record of going to visit people of different faith groups when they were sick and when they were in difficulty. When he came to Medina, he brought about a pact to bring people together on the basis of peace and harmony despite their different backgrounds. And also he took part in what is known as the Halful Fuzul, the alliance of virtue. Perhaps something that Ismail had spoken about, Ahmad Katrada speaking about the alliance of people, the green peace of people coming together on the basis of the common good of humanity. Together with that, one important point with regard to what we also, the lessons that we can take from Christchurch is the sanctity of life. The Quran says, كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. He who kills a single human being, it is as if he has killed the entire humanity. And the point is not you have killed one person or two people or 50 people. It is you have taken the courage of killing a human being. And since the Almighty has granted sanctity to the life of a human being, if you have killed one, it is as if you have killed the entire humanity. And part of sanctity is not to stigmatize people. Since 9/11, the war on terror has the intended or unintended consequences of stigmatizing an entire group of people on the basis of their religion. This has been happening not only in private chats, but also in so-called quote-unquote respected chambers. Pauline Hanson, for example, in Australia has called Islam and Muslims a disease. Fraser Anning, also someone who is part of the legislature, speaks of a final solution when discussing Muslim immigration. This type of climate breeds discrimination, harassment, and ultimately violence, as we have seen what had happened in Christchurch. Between March 2016 and 2017, they were, by a lobby group in the United Kingdom, which they have monitored, 143,920 tweets which were considered derogatory and offensive and discriminatory against Islam and Muslims. And when you start legitimizing and you start creating and stigmatizing a group of people, what happens is you legitimize their killing. You legitimize violence against them. It's not looked upon as with the seriousness that it deserves. It has happened in many parts of the world. It happened in South Africa with the Swat Khafar. It happened in Rwanda, as we see, with regard to the genocide and the massacre that had taken place. And part of the situation and lessons that we learn, that we must never allow the stigmatization of any group of people, because that opens the door for violence against them. And then, of course, I will also say, and in conclusion, as many of our previous speakers have said, I'm not going to reiterate many of the things. We believe in one very important point, and that is, as a community, as a society, we rise to harmony that we have in our community and society and may it grow and may it always be them. Because, many Muslims will tell you the moment they come back to South Africa, they just feel a sense of safety and security. They don't feel the phobia the way they feel in any other countries. And we hope that this will continue in our country, and we will be able to share this with people of other faiths, other cultures, and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Maulana Ibrahim Bam. MEC Vadi, I don't know if I can engage you after the program on the ANC's policy on fast-tracking radio DJs into higher office. Or do you have to be part of a faction? Before we move on to our last speaker for this evening, on behalf of the Jamiatul Ulama South Africa, that's the Council of Muslim Theologians and the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, we would like to thank all of our esteemed speakers for availing themselves tonight, and all of those who have attended the program, and all the listeners on Radio Islam International and the viewers on ITV. As MEC Vadi had said, we require a consistent effort, a consistent campaign, but at the same time, we should never underestimate the value and the benefit of such gatherings of solidarity. Our final speaker for this evening is a struggle stalwart, the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or International Relations, Ibrahim Ismail Ibrahim.
I must tell you, the key you found was mine. Thank you. Greetings to everyone. I think much has been said. It's quite late, so I'll try to not speak for very long. We all, of course, have condemned the shooting, this ghastly deed committed by a white supremacist. And of course, we admire the unity of the New Zealand people who've come out with one united voice, not only condemning the killing, but supporting the Muslim community of New Zealand. Of course, much has been said of the Prime Minister. I saw on TV the other day that she was coming out of the mosque during Jummah prayer with a full hijab. That was a way that she was showing solidarity with the Muslim community. Now, of course, it's surprising what happened, and not surprising as well, as people have said. For a long time, this anti-Muslim Islamophobia, some people call it, had been building up in Europe, particularly with the emergence of right-wing political parties. You remember in Swaziland, a country that was open to everyone, neutral country that gave asylum to people fleeing. They banned the construction of a minaret. There were 150 mosques there which had only 4 minarets. They wanted to build two more. And then there was a big commotion. They went on a referendum and they banned the building of a minaret. Even in America, in New Jersey, for instance, they used the zoning issue to prohibit Muslims building a mosque. Prohibit Muslims building a mosque in the United States of America. In Athens, of course, you know that there's no mosque in Athens. There are 250,000 Muslims there. During the Ottoman Empire, they promised them that they were going to build a mosque. They built a mosque, but they couldn't open it now because the Dawn rally, the Dawn party is holding a rally, and they said they were not going to allow this mosque to be opened. In Germany in 2017, 900 attacks were recorded against the Muslims. Austria closed 7 mosques and they kicking out 60 imams. Now this was announced by the Chancellor of Austria, closing 7 mosques and expelling from the country 60 imams. You know that Denmark has banned burqa and niqab. Only 150 women wear the burqas, but they were all banned, and France, Belgium, Austria passed similar laws. It was amazing. I read a story of a girl, a student leader by the name of Mariam in France. She appeared in TV with a hijab on. She was having some interview. The Interior Minister said it was shocking and provocation. It was a provocation. And you know Charlie Hebdo, you know the magazine Charlie Hebdo? We all remember Charlie Hebdo. They caricatured her as a monkey. They said this was a monkey wearing hijab. You see? You know, the Italian Prime Minister also went to Sicily, the new right-wing Prime Minister, and he told the immigrants, pack up your bag because you're going to leave. And in Germany, the social union said, Islam does not belong to Germany or Europe. Now that is historical nonsense. You know, Muslim civilization in Spain was there in the 8th century. It was tolerance and learning, while neighboring countries were in ignorance and barbarity of the Dark Age. Now, as Ismail Wadi has said, that the murderer, the killer, praised Trump, and he praised the man who killed, the man in Norway who killed 77 people. That was his heroes. He said he was in consultation with them. Now, you see, there is this question of dehumanization. What has happened there dehumanized a whole nation and a whole religion. During the apartheid days, I sometimes wonder how the security police could carry out such brutal action. You know, I was reading the other day, they would burn somebody, they'll burn him. It takes 6 hours to burn, they said, his body or her body, and then they'll have beer and have a party. They committed such brutal acts because the apartheid system dehumanized the blacks. They were not fully human. And that is what happens when you begin to dehumanize. Now the Muslims have been dehumanized with all this action, this anti-Islamic action. In many countries, they are prohibited now from even building a mosque or making azan for that matter. You can find that that is happening in Germany when they dehumanize the Jews, the vermins, etc., etc. They're not humans. That is why the Germans didn't think twice in massacring, killing, and putting the Jews in the gas chamber, because they were dehumanized. Rwanda, as somebody mentioned, they dehumanized the Tutsis. Tutsis were not human, the cockroaches. That is why overnight they could kill 800,000 Tutsis. Now, this type of dehumanization that takes place, and Wadi is right, we must guard against this dehumanization. Anti-immigration and Islamophobia is the same thing, it's two sides of the same coin. Now, the ultimate goal is to counter Islamophobia should be the creation of a fair and just society. You know, one day I was having in a coffee shop tea with somebody from Saudi Arabia. And he was from the royal family, quite a high person. And I think a woman walked past with covered all up. And he says, you know what? This woman walked past, nobody even gave a second glance. Nobody even worried. Nobody even cared. Of course, in France, you could be arrested. In other countries, you could be arrested. That shows the amount of freedom and tolerance that we have in South Africa. Now, of course, Muslims, of course, like any other religion, we need to look at ourselves. We need to have our own introspection, you see. We need to condemn terrorism no matter where it comes from. Whether it's in New Zealand, whether it's in Pakistan or Afghanistan, whether it's in Yemen or in Syria or in Somalia. Terrorism is terrorism. No one has a right to take an innocent life. But I think that the European Parliament has met and what they call, they assembled a toolkit to counter Islamophobia. And I think that is a good sign. But in conclusion, I must say that, while we condemn what happened in New Zealand, but this is not the end of it. I think there are more white supremacists are running around, and we can expect more attack, not only on the Muslim, but on the Jewish community and on the blacks in Europe. There's anti-black feeling, anti-black phobia there, anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic feeling that is growing among the right-wing people in Europe. And we should have a way of countering those things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. We close the program this evening by bidding you all a good night and greeting you with the universal Islamic greeting of peace, mercy, and blessings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.